Hi and welcome back. This is the EFR 510 Assessments video. The purpose of this video is to walk you through, step by step, the different assessments that are required for this course. Keep in mind that I do provide you with examples of student work for each assignment. These are located in the Resources tab on Blackboard, labeled according to the particular assessment. I'd highly recommend reviewing all of these samples that are available before you begin to complete any of the one assignments. Also keep in mind that the details of these assignments are also included in the modules. Let's begin with the weekly assignments, in-class assignments, and participation. In the schedule, you'll find all the different assignments that are required. They require reading and specific preparations that must be completed. All the assignments are going to be due by 5 o'clock on the due date. Keep also in mind that in-class assignments also will require you to have read and come to class prepared to demonstrate your knowledge and skills in a particular area. It's important to note, points are not given for weekly assignments, in-class assignments, or participation. These are all expected requirements of the course. However, failure to complete these or a general lack of participation could result in up to a 10% deduction in your final course grade. Now, the bulk of this course requires you to begin by choosing a qualitative case study. For this class, you'll create a research question, implement a basic research design, collect and analyze the data, then write up and report on your analysis. You should first begin by choosing a qualitative question to explore. Simple enough. I would recommend creating a very general question that is easy to collect both observational and interview data. Keep in mind, the more complicated your question is, the more difficult it will be to carry out all the procedures in a short amount of class time. Now, once you've chosen a qualitative case study, you'll need to frame it as a research question and submit this for approval. You'll need to include the actual research question, sub-questions, and the general design. This is where Maxwell's qualitative design book will be very helpful. Make sure that in your 1 to 2 page proposal, you follow the guidelines that are detailed in the module. Now, one important caveat. For any type of research study that you will complete, you would initially first begin to collect and analyze all the current literature on the topic to determine what gaps need to be filled and how best to fill those gaps. Now, you won't actually be doing that for this class. For this class, your study is to begin with the actual research question without a literature review, because the goal for you is to experience the process. The specific question is actually irrelevant because you're really just focusing right now on learning the skills. So that should put your mind a little bit at ease. Now, once you've actually chosen your qualitative case study, developed your question and sub-questions, the first place you'll jump in is the observational field notes, and this is the first major assignment. One thing to keep in mind is, please do not begin to do any observations until you've completed the observational module. I have very specific guidelines for what's included within these observations, so you would not want to begin until you've finished the observation module. Now, in an overview, this assignment requires you to spend a total of 3 hours, divided into at minimum 5 different times in a social setting, watching social interactions. You may choose any observational setting that you'd like, but of course it's got to be related to your qualitative research question. You must submit your qualitative research question for approval prior to doing any observations or interviews. And of course, this is really important so you're not wasting your time. Your qualitative research question will be a case study of your choosing. Remember, you need to choose a particular social setting then that represents the case that you want to study. Now, in terms of the observation study, seems obvious, but you'll begin with the observation. I would recommend a publicly accessible site that you can visit at least 5 different times to complete the 3 hours of observation. Now, you can divide those 3 hours into as many beyond 5 different times as you want. They must be reasonable intervals. One thing that's important to keep in mind is you must be completely free to observe and not participate in the social scene. Let me give you an example. Let's say that your research question is, what's the social significance of the dog park in Grand Forks? Now, let's say that that's your question, and you've chosen the dog park as a place where you're going to be observing. Now, obviously, when you do your observations, you don't want to take your dog because that obviously will divide your attention. Likewise, let's say you're interested in the role that basketball teams play within a certain community. Okay, if you play basketball, you can't observe while participating in the game. The goal here is you must have a completely focused amount of time at this place. Likewise, what also seems obvious is you'll want to choose a place where people will be doing things. Okay, again, so a movie theater, not a great place for observations. You'll want to be able to see what people are doing and hopefully overhearing some dialogue as you move about the place. One key thing to remember also about the observation study is you may need to get permission from the location. For example, again, let's say that you're observing at a small local place. You'll probably want to let a manager know exactly what you're doing there for 5 different times on 3 different hours. I find that when you approach someone, you tell them exactly what you're doing and for the course, that most people are really very amenable to having you observe in the location. The smaller the setting, the greater the need to get permission. So, for example, if you're going to be observing basketball games, probably don't need permission. But if you're going to be observing at a local barber shop, it would be a good idea to get permission from the manager. One question students often have is when to go. I would recommend choosing a variety of times, especially times when you know there'll be enough people to observe, and then try to choose at least 2 different spaces within that place if it's applicable, if the space is big enough. Remember also, it's very important, you should choose times that are best suited to actually see the interactions that you're interested in, not times that are best suited for your schedule. Again, the purpose of the research is about answering this specific question, not necessarily fitting the research into your particular schedule. The next question that students often ask is how to begin. Now, I'll start off with an example. Let's say that you wanted to choose the University of North Dakota Memorial Union, and you want to observe the social interactions of people at the union. Maybe your research question is, what's the purpose of a Memorial Union on college campuses? So, before you actually would begin your observation, you would need to sketch out a site map. You can refer to the Carspechan reading for this, for each of the locations that you're choosing to focus on. The site maps or the locations need to be included in your final set of field notes. And for this assignment, you're required to demonstrate that you've employed thick description. And again, remember, a lot of these concepts are fully covered in the modules. So if it doesn't seem obvious now, don't worry, we'll cover it. I always recommend spending the first observation time dedicated to observing broadly. Again, the goal is to capture this overall detailed description of the place. This is important, and the more you can get detail and the more you practice that detail, the better you'll get at observing. Your goal is to describe as much as possible that social scene with as much detail as possible. You can never have too much detail. As you move on to your next observation, those should be focus observation, watching particular people or a particular area within that social scene. And remember, your goal is to be a fly on the wall, meaning you don't necessarily want to appear to be observing. Staring at people certainly makes them change their behavior, so you really want to capture them in their natural environment, acting as they naturally would. Think about creating as little interference as possible. Also keep in mind that you should keep track of your time references at 15-minute intervals. One thing, don't forget that you're required to include observer comments in the typed version of your field notes. And there are examples of observational field notes in the Resources tab. You'll need to solicit, interview, and transcribe a minimum of 2 hours of interviews from 3 or more different people that you know are willing to participate in your research study. I'd recommend beginning to consider who might be potential participants. Again, keep in mind your research question now, where you might want to observe, and then who you might want to interview. Consider the research question, who is going to be the best informants or the best participants? Who can give you the most detailed insights based on their experience in that place? A couple nuts and bolts to keep in mind. Audio files of each interview must accompany the typed transcript, and I will check them for accuracy. Please save the audio files in a separate folder. Transcripts should be submitted to me electronically. I will do spot checks. I won't listen to every single transcript all the way through and check word for word, but I will do spot checks to see how accurately you are transcribing the interviews. The interview should follow word for word, or the transcript should follow the interview word for word, including everything that you say as the interviewer. Don't skip over what you say. That's equally important. The transcript should include pauses, emphasis, observational notes that you took while you interviewed. Keep in mind you've got to include facial responses, gestures, body language, tone. All of these should be put in brackets. The accuracy of the transcript will be based on the audio recording. Under the assessments, I've also included a very highly simplified example, but keep in mind, again, you've got to capture all the ands, well, I don't know, maybe. Yes, you capture everything that you say and everything that they say. Your actual interview is graded based on your ability to prompt the interviewee and ask follow-up probing questions that solicit more detailed answers from the participants. I don't grade on your typing or necessarily your accuracy, but I do look for your ability to prompt the interviewee, getting at more and more detail from that interviewee, and also to ask those really good probing follow-up questions. That's what your grading for your interviews is based on. Now, moving on to coding and thematic analysis. You're required to use a Word, Excel, or some type of qualitative software to create a document spreadsheet or some type of visual representation of how you went about coding. And that means from the very beginning of coding to the very end of your analysis. You want to detail every single step in the process. That's called your audit trail. So what I want to see is how you're going to explain how you organized your codes into hierarchies based on saliency, displaying your emergent categories, your emergent themes, and how you move from categories into themes and eventually your assertion. And again, all these concepts are very clearly covered in the class. So don't worry if you don't understand the process right now. The key to remember right now is making sure I get to see your process from the very beginning to the very end. Also, you'll include a copy of each fully coded transcript when you turn in your coding your thematic analysis. Now we're almost done. One of the final pieces of your assessments is a written narrative of your findings. You'll have the opportunity in this class to read several examples of how qualitative research is written up, and this is to guide you in writing up your own narrative of your own findings. The EFR YouTube page also has examples of how to write up qualitative findings in a very nice tutorial, as well as APA tutorials. Remember, your final write-up has to be formatted strictly to APA and should follow all the APA guidelines. I'm looking for a document that's no less than 6 to 8 pages. Now, keep in mind, you should choose your quotes carefully and representatively and trim them to what is vitally necessary to support your argument. What I don't want is 6 to 8 pages of quotes. What I need to see is your analysis and the data that supports that analysis. So for this assignment, long quotes are completely unnecessary. You should be able to make sure that your argument has a logical organization, has a logical and clear flow to its analysis as you make your argument. And actually, last but not least, is a presentation. You'll share a 10 to 15 presentation of your case study with the entire class. The final presentation should have a visual representation of the final codes, themes, and assertions, much like what you submitted to me for your assignment, and also include at least 2 examples of representative quotes from the data and 2 samples of observational data in your final presentation. So in a nutshell, that's a description of all the assessments that are required for EFR 510. If you have any questions as we move along, please don't hesitate to send me an email. I'd love to see lots of questions that I can post on our Course Questions Wiki. Thanks so much.